Joining us for more on tonight's topic is Kurt Lavarello, Executive Director of the School Safety Advocacy Council, Sarasota Attorney Jeff Young, known locally as the Gun Attorney, and Ronald Chapman, the owner of Chapman Law Group and a NRA certified law enforcement firearm instructor, and also an attorney with the NRA, correct?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Kurt, let me start with you, because one of the fascinating things in Kate's story is the high technology that school districts like Sarasota and Manatee are now using in terms of school safety. Boy, you didn't have that around when we were kids.
No, you didn't, Alan. And one of the things we're seeing are school districts across the country moving toward more robust visitor management objectives, making sure that they know at all times who is on their campus and for how long and for what purpose. It also ties into the camera system. You see a lot of towns and communities across the country also tying in their camera system to local law enforcement so they can tune in, which all goes into making the response in the event of a crisis a lot more rapid than it would normally have been in the past.
But there's so many schools out there, you know, K through 12. I would imagine it would be, you know, you think of every entry into every building. Is it possible to secure every entry?
You can try to do the best. In the past, it's been a solution of having campuses with 7, 8 different entrances and exits, and they're moving more toward now having one single point entryway and making sure that areas like the cafeteria are safeguarded, because that used to be an area that was exposed. So it is moving. We're doing a lot better. We still have to do a lot more work in our private schools and our charter schools than we've done in the past, but we're moving in the right direction.
And Jeff and Ron, you know, one thing that was in Kate's story is about the school resource officers and how those programs have been cut back because of budgetary reasons over the last couple of years. I do know that in many school districts those have been crucial. I mean, those are police officers on the scene, armed when they need to be. I know it's not an end-all, but isn't that really an important component to school safety?
Sure. I mean, I think it'd be great if we could all have school resource officers back at the schools. I remember when I went to school, we had one at our school down in Venice. It's like anything else. Anything you can use is great. So whether you can use all the great technology, whether you can use all law enforcement officers on the scene, it should be an all-or-nothing approach, or not an all-or-nothing, but an all-encompassing approach to try and get as many resources in there as you can.
But I'm sorry.
I was going to say the resource officers and the technology work. The CDC issued a report in 2013 that shows school violence peaked in 2009 at 63 deaths during 2009, and has steadily decreased. I mean, we've had things like Sandy Hook, which had 20 deaths, and other things since then were sort of an anomaly. But these kind of technologies that we're talking about do work, but we need more training too. We need active shooter training, should be in every school so that teachers and students know what to do. You know, run, hide, and defend yourself should be an acronym that everybody knows in these school systems. And
obviously we're here also to talk about the debate about whether or not, you know, who should be armed in the schools, if at all, and teachers and so forth. I want to leave that to our next segment where we have more time, but still, you know, people have pointed out when the first big school shootings that we talked about in Colorado at Columbine, there were, I believe, 2 school resource officers there who were armed, and that did not stop that tragedy from happening.
That's correct. It didn't. And, you know, they had a much different scenario out there. They were an open campus, and I've interviewed and met with the officers that were involved in the Columbine incident after it had occurred, and they also had an open campus, so a lot of kids left during lunch. And those officers would also be responsible for the areas around the school, and that's when the incident took place, when the officers were off campus at some of the local lunch places where the kids frequented. And that even has changed some. You know, before Columbine, we really never used the word active shooter in a school situation. So that changed the dynamics of school safety considerably.
And I also recall that in major metropolitan areas, you unfortunately had metal detectors going to some schools. And I'm curious if you gentlemen think that is a needed thing in this day and age, especially when you're concerned about young people bringing weapons into schools.
If you just look at the facts, every 2.9 months, there's a mass shooting in America that involves at least 4 people. Not all those occur in school, obviously, but these kinds of things are going to happen. And then you add on top of that mental health issues that sometimes bring people into schools to do bad things. You add on top of that, terrorism and other kinds of things. So it's not one size fits all. You have to have multiple approaches, all the things we're talking about here, and they have to be ingrained in the schools, including metal detectors.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there just for a moment. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll hear from the manager of security for Manatee County in our expert interview. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Kurt Lavarello, Executive Director of the School Safety Advocacy Council, Sarasota Attorney Jeff Young, known locally as the gun attorney, and Ron Chapman, the owner of the Chapman Law Group, and who also works on legal issues with the NRA. Gentlemen, thank you again for joining us. So let's get there. Every time we have one of these terrible school shootings, especially Sandy Hook, the debate once again is whether or not their teachers and other school personnel should be armed with firearms. And is that a component that we should be looking at, or is this just a bad idea? More guns in the school, does that really make schools more safe? And Jeff, let me start with you.
Sure. Well, I definitely think it's something we should look at. I think when you're dealing with the safety of your children, everything should be on the table. We shouldn't cut anything out right off the top and just say, let's never even discuss that. I mean, we are dealing with our children here, who are the most important items that we have in the world. So I think when you're looking at campus safety and the safety of the children, it should be an all-encompassing approach. We should look at technology. We should look at school resource officers. But I don't see any reason why we would cut off something like firearms. I mean, we use firearms to protect our money, our politicians, our movie stars, our athletes. Why wouldn't we use them to protect our children, the most important resource that we have?
Well, let me pose this question. Even in situations where you have trained police officers at the highest levels, mistakes are still made. So even if you have, whether it's teachers or members of the administration or the staff, trained, they're not going to be as trained as veteran police officers. So the question is, in a terrible situation, are more people with more firepower the answer to saving lives?
Well, I would say yes, but...
Well, I think there are reasons why the International Association of Chiefs of Police and groups like our Florida Association of School Resource Officers, those are the officers that are in the schools throughout our state, oppose others carrying firearms in a school environment. First, there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that it works. In other states that have allowed firearms to be carried, such as Utah and Idaho, we saw scores of accidental shootings when they passed the law to allow it. The second thing is, as a law enforcement officer, like my background, I wouldn't want to respond to that school with the report being that we have one bad armed person and 4 or 5 good armed people, and then you're going to Monday morning quarterback me because I have to make a split-second decision
of who the good guy
is and who the bad guy is in a school situation.
I think we're kind of missing the argument there. I mean, you have to look at the statistics first. First of all, an active shooting situation takes from 10 to 15 minutes. It takes from 10 to 15 minutes for our law enforcement to arrive on the scene. Every 7 seconds an active shooter is involved, there's a death. So what you want to do is teach active shooter response. So you're going to teach to run, hide, and defend. Those people that are properly trained. We're not suggesting they go looking for the shooter, but if they're in the classroom, they're hiding with their students and they're armed. If that active shooter comes in, they're able to respond.
I want to cut that into 2 different pieces here because, Kurt, are we doing a good enough job in terms of teaching kids and teachers and school staff about what to do when there is an active shooter situation?
Well, we're doing better, but we have a long way to go. And Ron's absolutely right. We need to do a better job. I have no problem whatsoever with active shooter training for staff to teach them what to do. The run, hide, and defend thing we've supported in the past. I think it's good training that needs to take place, but I stop short of arming teachers.
Right, then let's get to the real point here. Ron's point was it takes 10 to 15 minutes for law enforcement to arrive at the scene while bad things are taking place. But Kurt is saying for police officers responding to the scene, how are they supposed to know who are the good guys and who are the bad guys?
Well, look, I think you have two issues there. Number one, you have to trust that your law enforcement officer are properly trained to be able to make that distinction. But the other issue is you want to give people options. Self-defense and concealed carry is all about options. I don't want the only option for the teacher to be to lock themselves in a room with their children and pray that the guy passes their room and goes on to the next room. I want them to have the option to at least try to defend themselves and their children. I would worry about what happens when the cops get there later on, because if everybody's dead when the cops get there, it doesn't make any difference.
Kurt.
Well, I think one of the things, you know, you do have to keep in mind is, as tragic as an incident like Sandy Hook was, where we just an absolute tragedy of loss of lives, there were kids that lived in Sandy Hook because teachers followed the proper protocol. They went to a lockdown where the gunman couldn't get into their door and breach security. So that's your first step of defense. And the training starts well beyond that. But, you know, it's important to remember that law enforcement, even the well-trained law enforcement officers that are in our schools and in our streets, in high pressure situations, we miss our targets 70% of the time. So you can imagine Miss Jones, who may be taking an elementary school class in a high pressure situation with like an active shooter, is going to be much, much worse than a miss rate. And when that miss rate and the backdrop of those missed shots are other students, it just doesn't equal to a good solution.
The problem with that analysis or that argument is we're talking about, at least the NRA's position is 60 to 80 hours of intensive training that these people go through. And like Kurt said, or like Jeff said, it's only people that have a background and want to carry a firearm. So their responsibility is to be well trained and have the ability to use that firearm when necessary.
Right, but Kurt is saying that law enforcement officers miss 70% of the time in high pressure situations. So if trained veteran police officers have that kind of percentage in high pressure situations, even a well-trained school teacher or other staff at schools, I mean, it seems like that might be a real issue.
Well, it could be a real issue. If someone's untrained and they miss, it could be a real issue. But in most cases, when you're talking about the teacher going into a run-hide situation, the shooter comes in, there's no other kids usually around that shooter. And remember, most of these shootings end with the individual, the active shooter, committing suicide before the police ever get there. The police come, they do their job, but basically they create chaos for 3 or 4 hours, and all they do is clean up because they're there too late.
Well, the other thing, I think, the one thing too that we're missing is most of the people that come onto a school campus carrying a gun, whether it be a breach the classroom or some other area of the school, don't shoot anyone. They may have a gun, and then many times they either commit suicide or they're talked out of having a gun. So the last thing you'd want is that teacher or the other staff person to not know how to handle adolescent behavior and not know how to respond to a person with a gun.
All right, let's broaden this conversation a little bit further, because we're in Florida over the past year. We've also talked about the proposal by Representative Stubbe from our area to allow campus carry at our universities and colleges. As much as some people would support that, other people would say, geez, I remember when I was in college, indoor rooms, all the frankly stupid things that young people do. Now you're adding firearms to that equation. Why is this an idea that we should be really seriously talking about?
Well, I think the situation that you have there is those laws are basically saying that if you're somebody who has a concealed weapons permit, you've been through the training, you've passed all the background checks, and you acquire your permit, you are now just simply allowed to bring that with you when you go to the college campus. Nobody's saying that they're going to have 18-year-olds in a dorm room with handguns because you can't get a permit at 18. So I don't understand why, if we want to give these people their firearms or give them their certification and say the law says that you can now walk around the streets with your firearm, why do they all of a sudden become idiots or incapable of handling that firearm simply because they passed some magical bubble around a school or a college? If they're trained and smart enough and mature enough to handle their firearm out in the street, these laws are saying is they can then bring it onto the college campus when they come there for school.
There are people who live on campus who are older than 18 years old, and maybe the reason why is that even if you're 18 to 21 years old, in the college atmosphere, people have been known to drink and maybe do drugs, and when those two things are involved, a lot of stupidity takes place?
That's correct, but those people wouldn't have a concealed permit and they wouldn't be allowed to bring their firearms onto the campus. Again, we're not talking about 18-year-olds keeping firearms in their desk in their dorm room. You're talking about people who already have their concealed permit simply being able to continue on carrying their firearms when they come onto the campus to go to class, and then when they leave and go home or wherever they're at. You first have to have your permit.
Kurt, what about that?
Well, I understand what he's saying, but you still have to keep in mind the 18-year-old or the 19-year-old that lives on campus would be entitled under the proposal that was made by Representative Stuvey. They would be allowed to have their firearm on campus. And there's a reason why the state of Florida doesn't allow a person with a concealed permit to go into a bar because there's alcohol. And as you mentioned earlier, the mix of alcohol, I mean, we'd be realistic in our campus.
Just a few seconds left, but I want to get to the, I know there's this young woman who's often at, I believe she spoke at the Republican National Convention. She was raped on campus, and she speaks today about if she was able to be armed on campus, that rape may not have taken place.
If I could, one of the problems is you have active shooters, you have other people that want to do violent crimes, and violent crimes on school campuses is up, including university campuses. If you eliminate the weapons, you tell, I'm going to have people in this pool that are unable to defend themselves, active shooter, bad person, go to the university, because you're going to find a bunch of sheep walking around that the law says can't defend themselves. You have a target-rich environment.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there just for a moment. Welcome back. We're discussing school security with our roundtable. And gentlemen, I want to wrap it up here. Kurt, I'll start with you. Is new technology enough to keep our kids safe, or is it time that we start thinking about arming teachers and school personnel?
Well, I don't think there's a time we should ever start thinking about arming teachers and other personnel. I think the thing that school districts can do to end it would be just to sit back and understand that school safety has to be a priority, just like test scores are. Once we get that frame of mind, we'll jump leaps and bounds.
Jeff?
No, I think I have great respect for our teachers, and we entrust our children with them for 8 hours a day. And to just assume that they wouldn't have the ability to make these important decisions or go through the proper training and step up to protect our kids, I think does them a great disservice. I think a lot of them will be willing for it, and we should give them the option.
Ron?
Well, I think the debate is excellent, and I think we need to continue to do the debate, but I don't think we should take allowing those teachers that are properly trained whether they should be able to carry firearms off the table. I think we need to do all of it because it's only going to get worse.
And since it's 2 against 1, now, Kurt, I'll give you the last word.
No, I think, statistics have shown us, too, after the Columbine incident, that the two biggest things school districts can do is to be mindful of bullying issues on campus, because most of the shooters have come after bullying incidents, and the other is to keep your ears to the ground, like I said earlier, and listen to what our kids are telling us.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Before we go, we want to share some of our feedback we got on Friday's incredible show that we told you about a man who is in a vegetative state and completely unknown. He was taken to Manatee Memorial Hospital after falling out from his wheelchair. Lutheran Services is caring for him, and they got a court order allowing us to take video in an attempt to help identify this man. Here is what you have to say. Donna Perry Perez writes, "There is a reason for HIPAA laws. It is simply stating that there could have been handled in a more discreet manner, protecting this man's privacy and not disclosing his medical condition to all." Belinda Ventry writes, "Forget HIPAA. This man needs help in finding his family. Have you guys even thought that his family may be out there searching for him? And how do you feel if he was your loved one? Sometimes we just need to use some common sense in situations like this." And Bonnie Sue Davis writes, "I am praying for his family and friends to recognize this poor man. Amen." Well, if you have any information about who this man may be, you're asked to call Lutheran Services at 941-358-6330. Again, that number is 941-358-6330. If you'd like to join the conversation about tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7, and we'll be back in 1 moment with headlines making news at this hour. But first, I want to thank our guests for being here: Kurt Lavarello, the Executive Director of the School Safety Advocacy Council; Jeff Young, an attorney here in Sarasota; and Ronald Chapman, the owner of Chapman Law and an attorney with the NRA. Gentlemen, thank you. We'll be back in a minute.